Something that you may or may not know about me, which is that I am a jelly bean connoisseur. My wife and I really love jelly beans, and there was a period of time where we were going out, usually around Easter time. Companies release some version of jelly beans based on their product. So these days, this is the rule of business these days: diversify so that you can make more money. And so you can get Swedish fish jelly beans. Gone are the days when you just have Brock's, jelly beans, right? You can get Nerds jelly beans, you can get Starburst jelly beans, all these different kinds. And we are jelly bean connoisseurs, and so at some point we were buying all the different varieties of jelly beans and trying them all and deciding which we thought were best and rating them. And because of my love of jelly beans, what I want to say to you today is that I'm going to put forward a theory as we talk about faith. We read this book, How Far is Faith? And little one, this little elephant, does a great job of asking questions that his mama then helps him to sort of define faith. But the one thing that they don't get to that I want to say to you today is that I think faith is like jelly beans. You see, little one is trying to figure out faith, and we find out that it's a lot of things. It's kind of like the clouds, we find out. It's longer than the walk that they're on. It's funner than the mud. And if you look at your worksheet, that's one of the lines on there, funner than the mud. I had to put that on a worksheet just because I heard people laugh when Janine read that line because, of course, we know that funner technically isn't a word, although if you're one of those people who have somehow managed to make it all the way through their life thus far and not said the word funner, you're really impressive, because almost all of us have at some point, right? And so, for little one trying to figure out faith is like all these different things. And Mama sort of laughs along the journey with little one trying to figure out faith because, he kind of gets it, but he kind of misses the point. And it's sort of like trying to find the best jelly bean that there is. It's fine to try to figure out which jelly bean is best, but the reality is that it misses the truth a little bit because there is no perfect jelly bean. I will tell you this, having tried all of them. Each of them, though, is good in its own way. And it's important to know that each of them is a jelly bean. Some of them don't necessarily look like it. Nerds jelly beans are covered in bumps rather than being smooth, which we usually expect from a jelly bean. At one point, we tried honey-flavored jelly beans that were shaped in the shape of a heart. And you might wonder whether a heart-shaped jelly bean is truly a jelly bean, right? Because the whole point is that it's supposed to look like a bean. It's in the name. And yet, even those were good in their own way, and they were a jelly bean in their own right. This is a lot like faith. Nobody's faith is perfect other than the faith of God and Jesus Christ. And the reality is that each of us has a faith that may be a little bit different, just like the variety of jelly beans, and yet it is a faith. There are commonalities that tie them all together, right, so that we can say that's faith in the same way that I say that's a jelly bean, and yet they are different, and each one is good in its own way. I've shared before about how I knew a woman at one point who disagreed with me about God's omnipotence. We both agreed that God was omnipotent. That word means that God knows all things. We just differed in how that existed. And the argument essentially was that she said, God has to know everything that is going to happen in my life, otherwise God doesn't know everything. And I said, yes, however, we believe in free will, and in order to have free will, we truly have to be able to make choices. If God knows the choice that I'm going to make ahead of time, then that's not a choice, right? There has to be some element in which God doesn't know what choice I'm going to make and yet knows everything. And so what I said and what I've come to believe as a Christian is that it's like a choose-your-own-adventure book. God knows all of the possibilities and is truly omnipotent in that sense of knowing everything that could possibly happen, and yet also has given humans the ability to choose and is sort of interestedly watching to see which path we'll take. And once we do make a choice, God knows what's going to happen out of that choice, right? And all those other things go away, and yet God knows all of what will happen, can, I guess, happen in the future. She couldn't accept this, and I understand that my version is not necessarily a traditional version, and yet it's how I've reconciled the fact that we say we have free will, because I really, again, I do believe that in some sense, if our days are already determined exactly and God knows everything that we're going to do, then how is it that we have free will is the question I ask, right? So this is how I have struggled with it. And my faith looked a little bit different than hers, and yet I would say we both had faith. She didn't think I did. And this is part of what this sermon is about. Faith is like jelly beans, friends. And I like all kinds of jelly beans. There are some that I like better than others, and I'm sure that that's true of you as well. And yet as I've walked the 42 years of my life so far, I have figured out that, there are a variety of faiths, and many of them fall within Orthodox Christian belief and yet are differed in ways. So, differences, I think, are good. Another example I always give with people is styles of evangelism. So I have occasionally encountered someone standing on a street corner preaching the gospel of Jesus to people. And I know a lot of people, and some of you are sitting in this room, who would say, "Oh, I don't like that. Why are they screaming at people?" And all these things. What I always say to people is, that kind of evangelism, I will say, is not my kind of evangelism. I'm not going to tend to stand on a street corner and yell to people about the gospel of Jesus Christ. It doesn't mean that someone shouldn't be doing that. And so again, in the same way, these are different kinds of faith. I have my own way of sharing my faith with people. That person has their way of sharing their faith with people, and I think they're both good. We have this tendency to want to categorize things into good and bad. What's acceptable and what's not. And instead, I would say, can't we see that there is good in both of those versions of faith? And I think, as I say, differences are good. The other thing then, along with saying, the fact that we divide things into good and bad, is that I would say, I was searching for the best jelly bean, because we always got this idea that we've got to find the best thing. But we don't necessarily need to be looking out for who has the best faith. And we do a lot of that too, kind of comparing people, saying this person's better than another. Someone just yesterday reminded me, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the fact that people sometimes ask me as a pastor to pray because they think my prayers are more effective than other people's prayers. We were about to experience rain, and they said, jokingly said, if you pray, the rain won't come, right? Because your prayers are more effective than other people's. That's that same thing where we're sort of looking for the best faith. Instead, faith is like jelly beans. They're all really good. None of them was perfect. And I really learned to appreciate each of them for the good elements that they brought. Today's passage that Bob read for us says, faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. The greatest of these. It's almost like searching for the best faith, the best jelly bean, the greatest. We hear that and we think, faith, hope, and love, there's somehow a rating there, but I want you to hear what's said first. It says faith, hope, and love, these three abide. Abide, the word that we use there and translate always as abide, means to live together. And so what Paul is saying is these three live together and they can't be separated. So we tend to hear this because we always hear greatest, and we're a culture that is obsessed with greatest, right, and best. And we hear that love is better than the others. No, they are interconnected and they can't exist without one another. Paul is simply saying that love is what guides these three in what they do. So, in some senses, saying that love is the greatest would be like me saying that my wife Megan is the greatest. It is true, and really, in our relationship, all credit should go to her, but we are also kind of a package deal. we're not Joel and Megan without Joel, right? And she's only the greatest in the sense that she's relating to me, and I make her look so much better, right? I knew you would understand that analogy. In this book about little one and Mama teaching little one about faith, the very last page has a quote from Hebrews as well, and it says, "Now faith is the confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see." When we hear this passage from 1 Corinthians, these three abide, faith, hope, and love, we need to hear also what faith is, and faith is like jelly beans. We know when they are jelly beans, and we know when faith is faith. Here, the writer of Hebrews identifies two main things that identify faith. It is a sense of confidence and a sense of assurance. That's how you know that it is faith. You see, that woman and I both had confidence that God knew everything, and we both were assured that God's knowledge would be guiding us in our life. And so we both had faith, even though the understanding of it was slightly different and there was some variety there. And so you hear little one again saying that faith is either like clouds or walking, or it's like the mud. And you have a variety of elements there, right? And each of them is true in their own way. And each of them is good for understanding faith in their own way. And yet none of them is perfect, right? This is why faith is like jelly beans. You can have really good jelly beans. There are elements of each of them that are very good. And yet none of them that we found was ever perfect. You can pick your metaphor. If you want to go with little ones, metaphors for faith, or if you want to go with my metaphor that faith is like jelly beans. You'll see on your worksheet, and it's fun to watch people. When I handed them worksheets today, most of you were like, "What?" This is very simple, folks. This is where I started off in school. If I assume you did as well. It's all things that you can trace just to practice your penmanship. And I know that may be hard enough for you as it is. You don't have one?
No, thanks for starting me off with an F, though.
Oh, I know, yeah. People mentioned that we started off with F today as if it's a grade. You all have some major trauma from school. If that's the first thing oh, yeah. And I see some teachers being like, "Yes, I do have trauma from school." Just some phrases. Some of them come out of the book, and of course you'll see there that faith is like jelly beans. I threw that one in there. I told you that I had to put faith is funner than mud because I think that's a really wonderful element of this book. You can pick your metaphor for what faith is, but the reality is that at the end of the book, what Mama says is that faith is really close by. Hopefully, as close as your local bowl of jelly beans. And it's meant to be shared, unlike your local bowl of jelly beans. Just kidding. In this book, Mama shares her faith with her child, and we're called to share our faith as well, and we need to find creative ways to do it. Either, like in this book, by teaching young people the ways in which we can find pieces of life that show us how faith is, or, finding other creative ways to do it, like making up metaphors about jelly beans. We need to share our faith, either standing on a street corner or across the dinner table or through our interactions with people on a daily basis as we meet them in the world and in life. This confidence and assurance isn't ours to hold on to. It's not like when we find faith that we then are like, "I'm just going to take this and hold on for dear life till I get to heaven." No, the goal of the gospel is that when we find that confidence and assurance, that out of that confidence and assurance, we share with others. Faith has always been meant to be shared. And why is it that 1 Corinthians says that out of these three that abide together, faith, hope, and love? I think what's interesting that I meant to point out there is that, Hebrews says faith is about hope, right? It's the assurance, it's the confidence in the hope that we have, right? Why is it that the greatest of these is love? It's because our love for others guides that drive in us to share our faith with others. So the greatest of these is love in relation to how faith, love, and hope reside together, because it's out of that love that we want to share our faith. It's out of love that we hold, love of God that we hold on to hope. Faith is something that must be shared, and that's why we started with this book this week, because Mama shares her faith as little one is asking all these questions, and we are on a year focused on sharing our faith. We must be people who share our faith, and we need to find different ways of doing it. We've done as a church, not just this church, I mean as a capital C church, we've done things the same way for a very long time, and we're realizing that perhaps the things we've always done are not working the way we always thought they would. And so we need to be creative the way that Mama's creative. She takes what little one says to her and works with it and says, yeah, faith is sort of like that, but not quite. Let me help you. Let me adjust that a little bit. I'm trying to come up with a new thing. I think I might write a book called Faith is Like Jelly Beans, right? You got to find new ways to bring people into faith and to understand it. And regardless, we must share our faith with one another. Amen.